And welcome to a truly synchronous edition of Ben's Junk. Because, as we all know, Ben's Junk ain't no good when it's out of sync. So anyway, right out of the gate here, fair warning, this is going to be a very talky and a very jargon-heavy episode. So if you get nothing else out of this, if you're a total non-techie, this is all about trying to keep the audio and video in sync with each other when I'm doing videotape transfers for archive. With that, down to business. So as a truly little in-joke at the end of the recent Cult VHS Distributors Volume 2 episode, I included a variation of the Sinister Cinema logo, which I covered in the episode, taken from a, as it turned out, very visibly damaged tape, but I didn't know that till I actually opened it up. But it looked like there were 4 instances of the same tape playing at once at times. So my initial thought was, before I opened up the tape to make sure, I thought it was just some stupid mastering error, like somebody forgot to hit a button to make everything lock in. And no, it was just good old chewed up tape. But this brought me back around to probably the all-time great ongoing issue regarding videotape transfers on archive: synchronization, keeping the audio and video together. And of course, if they do drop out of sync, it gets worse and worse and worse the longer the tape goes on. I want to say my standing record is like 5 seconds out of sync, between 5 seconds between the video and the audio. It's just terrible. But anyway, it seems like over the last couple of years here, more and more the tapes I've been getting for archive candidates are really, really screwed up. And I thought, oh great, my transfer unit is dying on me. So I would try it in other machines. I own a few VHS decks, and nope, I'm getting kind of the same result every time. So, well, I guess I just need to up my game on trying to keep things together. So anyway, for the last year plus now, really, I've been pretty quietly using a Videonics MX1 video mixer as a time-based corrector. That's not really necessarily the intent of the thing. It is, a video mixer, and you can do all sorts of cute little effects with it. But the time-based corrector is built in, and it's always on. Problem was that it wasn't doing a whole lot for my audio problems. It was helping the video a little, but there's already a TBC built into my regular transfer unit for VHS, and that thing's kind of wimpy too, but it does enough. But the problem with the MX1 is not just that it's not aggressive enough, but it has a habit of stamping a pattern of sorts onto the video, especially during dark passages. And maybe there's a bad capacitor in there or something, or it's always been like that. It's always been like that as long as I've owned it. But regardless, I've just started to back off on using that thing. Now, I do have 2 fail-safes for those really bad tapes, so I can force sync when I want to. Those 2 methods involve, well, one of them is my old Panasonic DVD recorder, and then the other is my Cloner Alliance box. As for the Panasonic, even at the lowest compression settings, it gets a bit data lossy at times, especially in the video proper. It gets a little blocky and a little jittery. And as for the sync issue, it will freeze frames, like a TBC is supposed to do, but it has a tendency of doing it a little too long. And with the audio, it will add these quarter-second gaps into it of silence, and it'll force the audio back in sync with the video. So between the two, if it's a really bad tape, it gets distracting. The best example I can think of that I've actually released would be the Halloween 2020 episode of Archive, at the time I got stuck having to do a VHS vault for Halloween. But anyway, as for the Cloner box, the audio on that thing is always lossy. And I mean, that's not an issue if it's fully digital to begin with, because there were kind of compression settings, bit rates already in there to begin with. but it becomes kind of a problem with analog, and especially if it's a more high-end, so to speak, analog audio, like a hi-fi VHS or Betamax tape. So I don't really like using that. As far as analog goes, it's nice for when I just need that quick little minute or two of footage, but that's kind of about it. Otherwise, I try and confine it to using it for off-air recordings or transferring fully digital stuff. So with those two in mind, I've taken yet another stab at solving my ongoing sync problems, and this time with a hybrid time-based corrector and frame synchronizer. This is a Hotronic AP41, I want to say subcode SW, even though it says mod on the side, MOD. This is probably from the mid-90s, 1993 to 97. Well, as you can see, this is at least a semi-professional piece of gear. It obviously once lived on someone's production rack, and this thing has the battle scars to show for it. And someone was just determined to make sure that this was powered on at all times. That tape residue just will not come off. I've tried Goo Gone and acetone and stuff on it, and just nothing is working. Now, this is not plugged in at the moment, otherwise this would have lit up at least over here. So anyway, as intimidating as this unit looks externally and in terms of function, there really isn't that much to it. If you look inside, there's a whole lot of EEPROM chips and stuff in there, so it is fairly sophisticated internally. But anyway, let's keep things on a strictly functional level here. So starting on the left, let's start with the 4 knobs. So going in order, we've got one for video signal, just like maybe to give a little extra boost to a weakly recorded tape. Then chroma levels, color saturation, color phase, chroma phase, I guess for color errors, and setup, which seems to just be brightness. Then this unit can do genlock stuff. So in other words, it can be run in line with a black burst to keep any glitches and dropouts from occurring when you're working with and switching back and forth between multiple video sources. So 2 VCRs, a VCR and a camera, 2 cameras, 3 cameras, whatever. Now, as for the little bank of recessed potentiometers here, I don't have any of the necessary gear to adjust that stuff, but when I'm using this unit, nothing looks amiss as is, and some of that has more to do with genlock stuff, and I don't plan on doing any of that. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not touching it. As for the strobe section, you're going to see a fair amount of these plugs. As it turns out, these units, these particular Hotronic units, were basic units that were designed to be upgraded. Now, only one upgrade was ever made to this particular one, and it's on the back, and we'll get to it. Now, as for the bank of buttons, we can switch between the processed video signal and the raw video signal, so bypass. And the bypass can also be used when the unit is powered off. It will still pass it. Then we can switch between composite and S-video inputs. I have no strobe stuff on here, so that third button is useless to me at the moment. And then for the fourth one, I think this applies to just about all video formats, but it will catch 2 frames of video at a time, leaving you 2 fields of video running at any given moment. This will let you pick between those 2. Haven't found any personal use for that, but it's there. And that works in tandem with the final 2 buttons, which will allow you to freeze either of those fields at any given time and do some more strict stuff, but I haven't had a need for any of that. Anyway, let's take a quick cut here and we'll take a look at the back. This is actually going to be easier going from right to left. So starting on the far right here, we've got 2 inputs, composite and S-video, and the S-video jack being the only upgrade this thing has ever seen. In their basic form, these are composite only. We've got some spots where a serial digital interface, or SDI, output can be installed. We've got a would-be section for component video that the metal hasn't entirely even been knocked out of. We've got the Genlock stuff. We've got ADV Sync, which I think might be Genlock related, but I'm not positive. We've got a spot for a would-be S-video output, which I would really, really love on this, but Benny Boy and soldering irons don't get along too good. And then lastly, the composite output. And of course, this being more of a broadcasty thing, it's BNC, natively, I suppose you could say. It's still composite. Now, I only own one piece of proper video media gear with BNC, and that would be my industrial Betamax deck, which I've done a Ben's junk on. So unless I'm playing with that thing, I kind of have to do my usual adapter thing. Not that I can't just pop them right back off. In the name of putting this sucker through its paces, I've dug out some of the worst tapes that I have ever had to deal with. And unfortunately for me, sometimes that means the content itself as well. But thus far, not only has this been keeping the audio and video in sync, it's been doing so a lot more gracefully than my DVD recorder does. Having said that, I'm not too terribly impressed with the time-based correction, in that it's still pretty noisy. But having said that, that seems to mostly apply to my VHS transfer unit. But as it stands, VHS is the most common thing I deal with on archive, and so the transfer chain would generally be as follows. The VCR to the AP41 to my Digital 8 camcorder, which acts as an interface to the computer. And I have found myself still using the kind of weak built-in TBCs on both the VCR and the Digital 8 camcorder. Now, for whatever reason, maybe it just doesn't like that VCR. When I'm dealing with Betamax or 3/4 inch U-matic, it gets the job done, and it seems to be a little less quirky. So I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this for this year's round of Archive Annex postings that I do every summer, when I do commercial breaks and stuff. And we'll see how well I truly like it then. We'll see if this becomes a really regular thing around here. Now, I've mentioned some kind of quirky stuff with this. I should note here quite explicitly that this thing needs to warm up if you're going to use it. I found that I have to let it warm up for a good half hour first. Otherwise, it doesn't seem to lock on to much of anything. The VHS tapes that I've run for this test are Vampires from Scimitar Video, quite possibly the single worst so-called documentary I've ever seen. This first appeared on the Halloween 2020 episode. Then from the Christmas 2021 episode, Good Old Country Christmas, and the songs got stuck in my head all over again. And then I mentioned this one at the top of the episode. This is where I got that dodgy Sinister Cinema logo from. Sinister Cinema presents Classic Horror Trailers Volume 6. And I'll give the AP41 this much. It doesn't look like I'm running 4 copies of the same thing at once anymore. So anyway, let's talk about these two titles for a couple minutes here. Now, these are some of the worst tapes I've ever had in that they're loaded with dropouts. There's a weak video signal. I think these were both made on B stock, if not outright used stock. And if you've seen those archive episodes, one thing they have in common is there's a nasty skew at the top of the screen, and it's especially pronounced on Good Old Country Christmas. So as far as the new transfer of Vampires goes, it pretty well eliminated the skew. I was quite impressed. Good Old Country Christmas, it's still there, but it's mellowed considerably. So I'll call that a win. Now, I only did one non-VHS tape for this final run of tests, And this tape, to me personally, is the most infamous one in archive history. Not because of the content, but because this tape has given me more sleepless nights and heartburn than any other. And it's strictly on a technical level. That would be the Perry Players Video Showcase on 3/4 inch U-matic from 1980 or 81, I think. There's no date listed on it, but going by the fashions and sound and so on. So anyway, this had to have been one of the first viewer donations to archive, and the person that sent it to me didn't know what was on it either. I mean, you know, it could have been a totally different tape or recorded over or any number of things. But it's one of my favorites in terms of content. A band called the Perry Players, kind of an Earth, Wind, and Fire sort of group that this seems to be their only recorded evidence. But anyway, when I tried to transfer this initially, well, first I just tried to play it, and it was sticky, and it's still sticky, but it was sticky to the point where I couldn't fast forward or rewind it. So I baked it once I finally got some sort of baking rig set up, and it still clogged the head on my VCR, my U-matic deck. I baked it a second time, and it finally would play straight through, but I couldn't get a good pass at it. The dropouts were just too extreme. So even with my fail-safe Panasonic DVD recorder, a lot of it, unfortunately I couldn't find it for this video, but just trust me when I say it's a lot of extended freeze frames and gaps in the audio forcing the sync to happen again, to the point where it's pretty distracting. So in an act of desperation, I just dubbed this to Super Betamax Hi-Fi, and that maintained the sync at least, and then I just transferred the beta tape, and that is on Archive Annex as of my making this, but I think it's kind of soft, and it turned the audio a little muddy to boot, and it has a nice soundtrack to it, even though it's just mono. But I'd really like to remaster this one, so to speak. But I tried to take a new pass at it for this video, and unfortunately, despite the couple of bakings it's had and the fact that I store these things in silica gel packets, it's gone sticky again. About 3 minutes in, it clogged the crap out of my head on my U-matic deck, so I'm going to have to clean that thing out again. But this is now on the docket for me to rebake sometime this summer and try it again with the AP41. And if it's successful, I will post that to Archive Annex and have a good, proper remaster of this one, so to speak. It's become kind of a demented little mission of mine. But anyway, I'm going to call it a day here on the vocal front. I will leave you with some choice clips from my transfers here with text annotations. And otherwise, I will talk your ear off again soon.
Stoker, an Irishman, cleverly focused the vampire legend and set it firmly in Transylvania. He incorporated the characteristics of past fictional vampires and added a few of his own. Stoker was the first to create a vampire that was able to transform into a bat. People described him as disturbed, mentally ill, or sociopathic. People tend to regard them as a modern phenomenon, byproducts of our unnatural, stress-skewed society. But are they vampires? Perhaps. Just as we debate the issue of vampires today, so did our counterparts of the 15th and 16th century.
What would you like for Christmas?
Well, maybe French toast. How about
flapjack?
Sounds great.
Hey, did you remember to zap back the kitchen last night before we left?
The kitchen? I thought you said the living room. Uh-oh.
I thought we could have
What happened here? Why is the kitchen so messy?